Pooh Shiesty might be looking at life in a federal prison cell, and this time, there's no walking it back with a plea deal. On Tuesday, a federal judge sat in a Dallas courtroom, looked his lawyers dead in the eye after they offered up $700,000 in private surveillance to keep him monitored, and shut it down cold. No condition on this earth protects the public from this man, the judge said. The kid who once had the biggest song in the country is now sitting in a Texas jail cell with a federal judge on record saying there's nothing that can be done to safely let him out. And it's all because he ran up on Gucci with a Draco in a Dallas recording studio. But before I get into exactly what just happened in that courtroom, let me let you in on the road that got Pooh Shiesty here. Because this isn't some random stranger the feds decided to make an example of. This is a kid who was supposed to be the next face of Memphis rap and who burned every bridge that got him there. Lontrell Denell Williams Jr., the world knows him as Pooh Shiesty, came up out of Memphis with that raw, unfiltered street sound that Memphis has been feeding the culture for decades. He dropped his first real record, Hell Night, back in 2019, and it was enough to get him noticed in a scene that was already flooded with talent. What separated Shiesty wasn't polished, it was the opposite. He sounded like the streets talking directly into the microphone. No filter, no cleanup. That's exactly what caught Gucci Mane's attention. To understand why this whole situation is so messy, you have to understand who Gucci Mane actually is in this story, because he's not just some random label executive. Gucci Mane is one of the founding fathers of trap music, period. He came up out of Atlanta in the mid-2000s alongside guys like T.I. and Jeezy, broke through with Icy, and spent the next 2 decades building one of the deepest catalogs in the genre while surviving his own well-documented run-ins with the law. By the time the 2020s rolled around, Gucci had transformed himself from a street legend into a full-blown mogul, running 1017 Records as both an artist and a boss with a direct pipeline into Atlantic Records. He'd built a reputation for finding raw, unpolished Southern talent and turning it into radio hits, and he had a track record of doing it. So when a kid out of Memphis with Pooh Shiesty's energy landed on his radar, Gucci didn't hesitate. He signed him to 1017 in April of 2020, distributed through Atlantic, and almost immediately the bet paid off. Later that year, Back in Blood with Lil Durk exploded, climbing all the way to number 13 on the Billboard Hot 100. For a kid who'd been rapping over phone quality beats in Memphis a year earlier, that's an insane jump. He was named an XXL freshman. Billboard called him their hip-hop rookie of the month. In February 2021, he dropped his debut mixtape, Shiesty Season, and it landed at number 3 on the Billboard 200. Everything Gucci touched with this kid turned into a hit, and for a hot minute, it looked like Pooh Shiesty was going to be the face of an entire label. Then the streets caught up with him. In the same stretch he was blowing up commercially, Shiesty was racking up real legal trouble behind the scenes. Prosecutors say that in July of 2020, he was in a car in Memphis when someone inside it opened fire at a gas station. A few months later, in October of 2020, they say he was part of an armed group that shot 2 people and robbed a hotel in Bay Harbor Islands, Florida, making off with marijuana, codeine, and high-end sneakers. Then in May of 2021, prosecutors allege he shot and wounded a security guard after a performance at a Miami strip club. Investigators say they eventually tied him to the scene using the serial number on a $100 bill he'd flashed on social media, matched to a bill left behind after one of the shootings. That's how sloppy the evidence trail got. He was indicted on federal charges including conspiracy to possess firearms in furtherance of violent crime, Hobbs Act robbery, conspiracy, and drug trafficking. And at one point, he was staring down a possible life sentence if convicted on everything. In January of 2022, he took a plea deal, pleading guilty to 1 count of conspiracy to possess firearms in furtherance of crimes of violence, which knocked his exposure down from life to a maximum of 8 years. That April, a federal judge in Miami sentenced him to 63 months, a little over 5 years, with credit for time already served, plus 3 years of supervised release once he got out. He did his time at USP Pollock in Louisiana before getting shipped to FCR Miami, and even behind bars, he kept his name alive, dropping phone-recorded freestyles like Federal Contraband and talking through interviews about how prison had given him a new mindset. He stayed connected to the culture the whole way through, too. He called into Gilly the King and Wallow's $1 Million Worth of Game podcast from behind bars and talked about who'd actually shown up for him while he was gone, naming Lil Baby, Lil Durk, and Don Tripp as artists who wrote him letters and kept him afloat mentally during his bid. He also posted updates from inside, photos with a full beard and grown-out braids, just letting fans know he was still there, still counting days. Thanks to good behavior credit under the First Step Act, what was supposed to be a sentence running into 2027 got chopped down. He walked out of federal custody on October 7, 2025, after serving roughly 1,000 days, and instead of full freedom, he went straight into a home confinement re-entry program on house arrest out in Frisco, Texas, under federal supervision. For a minute, it actually looked like a redemption story. He came home and dropped FDO, a defiant comeback single that shot straight to #1 on Billboard's Hot R&B and hip-hop songs and hot rap songs charts. He was talking about growth, about learning his lesson, about coming back bigger than before. His lawyer put out a statement saying the government wanted to give him 10 years, and a judge agreed it wasn't appropriate, that Shiesty had learned from the experience and was ready for his next chapter. Fellow Memphis rappers like Big 30 and K Carbon were right there celebrating his homecoming. On paper, this was supposed to be the comeback arc. It lasted about 3 months. Here's where the story turns and where the case against him now stands. Prosecutors say that while Shiesty was still technically on house arrest, still under federal supervision from that 2022 gun case, he was already finding ways around it. According to newly unsealed court filings, he was allegedly involved in what investigators describe as an inappropriate relationship with one of his own case supervisors, an employee of Volunteers of America, the nonprofit contracted by the Bureau of Prisons to monitor people in his exact situation. That supervisor allegedly created fake day passes for him, letting him travel to locations he was never approved to go to. Investigators say those same fake passes were used on January 10th, 2026, the exact day everything blew up. That caseworker has since been fired. So what actually happened on January 10th? According to the federal complaint, Pooh Shiesty arranged what looked like a normal business meeting at a recording studio in Dallas to discuss the terms of his contract with 1017 Records, the same label Gucci Mane had built him up on. Gucci Mane showed up. So did a group of Shiesty's associates, eventually totaling 9 defendants once everyone was indicted, including Shiesty's own father, Lontrell Williams Sr., and fellow Memphis rapper Rodney Wright Jr., known as Big 30. Prosecutors alleged that once everyone was inside, Shiesty asked Gucci Mane to step into the recording booth to talk through his contract. That's when, according to the criminal complaint, he pulled out an AK-style pistol, what's commonly called a Draco, and forced Gucci Mane at gunpoint to sign a document releasing him from his 1017 Records contract. Think about the motive here for a second. This wasn't Shiesty trying to walk away from a dead deal with a label that had given up on him. FDO had just gone #1 on 2 different Billboard charts. He was hotter coming out of prison than he'd ever been before he went in. Prosecutors argue that's exactly the problem. A #1 record means real money on the table, real leverage, and according to the government, Shiesty allegedly decided the fastest way to get full control of that leverage wasn't a lawyer and a renegotiation, it was a gun and a printed contract. And this wasn't some scribbled napkin deal. Newly unsealed filings show the actual contract prosecutors say Shiesty had prepared. It demanded immediate termination of his 1017 deal, full release from every contractual obligation, complete ownership of his masters and intellectual property, and control over 1017's approval rights with Atlantic Records, handed directly to Shiesty at his own discretion. According to prosecutors, that document was printed at a Staples just hours before the alleged robbery took place, meaning if this happened the way they say it did, it wasn't a moment of panic. It was planned. But allegedly forcing a man to sign a piece of paper at gunpoint wasn't enough for Shiesty, according to prosecutors. They say he wanted it on camera too, wanted proof that would hold up. So Big 30 allegedly recorded Gucci Mane on his phone, forced to say out loud that Pooh Shiesty had been dropped from 1017. Meanwhile, prosecutors say the rest of the crew wasn't just standing around. They allege Shiesty's co-defendants displayed their own firearms and robbed the other victims in the room, Gucci Mane included, of roughly $450,000 in Rolex watches, jewelry, cash, and other high-end property. One of the victims was allegedly choked to near unconsciousness during the robbery, and Big 30 is accused of blocking the exit so nobody in that room could leave. Within hours of the alleged robbery, prosecutors say the defendants were already posting pieces of the stolen jewelry on social media, which is about as reckless as it gets. When you're trying to pull off a crime you don't want traced back to you. It didn't take long for it to come apart. Shiesty wasn't actually arrested until April 2nd, 2026, months after the alleged incident, when federal investigators formally charged him and 8 co-defendants with kidnapping and robbery. He pleaded not guilty to every count. His father was eventually released on bond while the case moved forward, but Shiesty himself has not caught the same break, not once. His legal team's first shot at getting him out came just days later, on April 8th, in front of U.S. Magistrate Judge Renee Harris Tolliver. His attorney, Bradford Cohen, tried to poke holes in the government's case right out of the gate, telling reporters outside the courthouse that he suspected the FBI sat on this case for 3 months because the alleged victims' statements didn't line up with each other. It didn't matter. Judge Tolliver found probable cause to believe the claims in the complaint and denied bond on the spot. In her written order, she pointed out that Williams was still technically serving his sentence from the 2022 gun case, still on home detention, when the January robbery allegedly happened, and that he had zero permission to even be in Dallas that day. Her logic was blunt. Any conditions she could offer him were the same or similar to the ones he'd already been given and already violated, so there was no basis to let him out. She cited his criminal history, the fact that this alleged allegedly happened while he was under active federal supervision, and his documented history of violence and weapons. Then in July this month, prosecutors dropped the video. The footage Big 30 allegedly recorded that day surfaced publicly, along with surveillance photos and screenshots included in newly unsealed court documents, appearing to show Shiesty and his co-defendants at the scene. It spread everywhere. DJ Academics posted about it, describing it plainly as Shiesty robbing Gucci and pulling the Draco on him when he tried to walk away. Social media had a field day. One user wrote that Shiesty was facing life in prison when all he had to do was hire a lawyer and renegotiate his contract, calling him a crash dummy. Another user pointed out that in the clip, Gucci actually looked composed the whole time, unbothered, like a street veteran who's seen worse. The internet basically split into two camps, one dragging Shiesty for throwing his career away over a contract he could have fought in court, and another picking apart Gucci's body language frame by frame. Either way, the video did exactly what prosecutors wanted it to do. It turned public opinion, and it gave the government a visual centerpiece for their case heading into trial. Gucci Mane, for his part, addressed the whole situation the way Gucci Mane addresses everything through a record. He dropped a track called Crash Dummy, produced by Zaytoven, where he raps about feeling the pressure build the moment he walked into that room, about dapping someone up while the whole time they were allegedly plotting against him. And that brings us to what actually just happened, the news. That's the reason we're even talking about this today. This week, in the Dallas federal courthouse, Pooh Shiesty had his second shot at bond, and it fell apart in front of everyone. His attorneys came in with what sounded like an airtight pitch. They proposed paying a private security firm up to $700,000 to monitor him around the clock while he awaits trial. Brandon Bess, the chief investigator from the security firm PPI Security out of Houston, actually testified that the level of protection they were offering would be equivalent to what's given to a sitting attorney general. That's the pitch his lawyers made. Round the clock, high level, paid for surveillance at a price tag most people will never see in their lifetime. Judge David Godbey wasn't buying it. He denied the request outright, and the language he used wasn't soft. He said there is no condition or combination of conditions that would protect the public, and he called Pooh Shiesty a dangerous person on the record in open court. Prosecutors leaned hard into the fact that the alleged kidnapping happened while Shiesty was already out on supervised release for a separate federal gun conviction, which is exactly the kind of pattern that makes a judge stop trusting any promise you put on paper. Money couldn't buy his way out this time. $700,000 in private security wasn't enough to convince a federal judge that Pooh Shiesty wasn't a threat. So where does that leave him? As of right now, Pooh Shiesty remains locked up in the Kaufman County Jail awaiting trial. That trial, originally scheduled for this past July, has already been pushed back once, and it's now set for February 22nd, 2027. He's charged as one of 9 defendants in a case that includes federal kidnapping and robbery counts. To put the stakes in plain English, federal kidnapping under the law carries a mandatory minimum of 20 years if the victim isn't released unharmed, and a maximum that goes all the way up to life in prison. That's not a sentencing guideline judges can shrug off. That's a floor set by Congress. Layer the robbery charges and the Hobbs Act-style conspiracy counts on top of that, and you're looking at a stack of federal exposure that very few defendants ever walk away from clean, let alone one who's already got a federal conviction on his record and allegedly reoffended while under supervision for it. Prosecutors have made it clear in court filings that they believe this case is strong enough to put him away for good, and every ruling that's come out of that Dallas courthouse so far has gone their way. He's still presumed innocent, and he's pleaded not guilty across the board, but 2 denied bond hearings, and a judge calling you dangerous on the record is not the position you want to be in 7 months out from trial. So no, Pooh Shiesty hasn't technically been sentenced to life in prison yet, but between the video, the unsealed contract, the eyewitnesses, the co-defendant recordings, and now 2 separate federal judges refusing to let him out under any circumstances, it's getting harder and harder to see a version of this story where he walks away from it. 2 different judges, months apart, looked at 2 different proposals from his legal team, one built around supervision conditions, one built around a 7-figure private security budget, and both times the answer came back the same. No condition exists that this man hasn't already broken. Think about the position he's actually in here. This isn't a first-time offender getting caught up in a bad situation. This is someone who did federal time for gun charges, got a second chance most people never get, came home, dropped a #1 record, and allegedly turned right back around and pulled a gun on the man who signed him, all while he was supposed to be under lock and key on house arrest. That's the detail prosecutors keep hammering, and it's the detail that keeps landing with judges. It's not just what he's accused of doing to Gucci Mane, it's that he allegedly did it while the ink was barely dry on his own second chance. The kid who blew up off Back in Blood is now sitting in the Texas County Jail, watching his own label boss turn the whole ordeal into a diss track, watching the video of the alleged robbery circulate on every hip-hop page on the internet, and waiting on a trial date in February of 2027 that might decide whether he ever sees the outside world again as a free man. 8 other people are sitting in that same legal limbo with him, including his own father and a fellow Memphis rapper who was supposed to be riding this comeback with him, not standing trial next to him. And if you stuck until the end, you'll probably also want to see these videos on your screen next. Have a good one.